Welcome back to the Der Show. Well, we've had the verdict, guilty on all counts. Not surprising. I predicted it. With this prosecutor, this judge, and this jury, it would have been a shock, even if there had been a hung jury of one or two holdouts. And now we move to the sentencing phase. And the judge has lots of options in terms of his what sentences he can impose. Theoretically, he can put him in jail for 4 years and say, officers of the court, put him in handcuffs, take him to Rikers Island. He could do that. That would be stayed immediately. An appellate court would issue a stay pending appeal. So the judge is not going to do that. He's not going to want to get reversed. Or he could say, hey, this is only a bookkeeping case. I'm going to give you a month of probation, slap on the wrist, and $1,000 fine. He's not going to do that. He is going to find some way of sending a very strong message, but one that will not result in the sentence being a basis for reversal, and one that he believes will not help Trump get elected president. So here are the realistic options that the judge has. He could sentence him, and this is what I think he would probably do. I'm not going to be making predictions because I don't really know this judge other than by his conduct in this case. But I think a very likely outcome would be the judge sentences him to a number of years in prison, 2 years, 3 years, and then says, but I'm going to suspend the sentence. I'm not going to suspend the sentence because this crime wasn't serious. The crime is serious. He deserves to go to jail for 3 years, but he's running for president. And there are millions and millions of people who want to vote for him, so I'm not going to interfere with the election. But I'm sending a message. 3 years in prison, suspended on condition that A, B, C, D. And then he imposes conditions that are somewhat onerous. So suspended sentence is one strong possibility. Another one, which is much harsher, and I don't think he would do it, but it's within the realm of possibility, is to say, look, I sentenced you to 2 years, but you're running for president. So I'm not going to have you serve your sentence now. I'm going to postpone, delay your surrender until after the election. If you're elected, well, you're going to have to surrender to the New York authorities and serve your presidency out of Rikers or one of the prisons in upstate New York. If you're not elected, hey, do go to prison, do not pass go, do not collect $200. So that's a possibility. I think that's really off the table. I don't think he's going to do that. I think if he did that, it would be reversed. It would also be stayed immediately. But nonetheless, if he said you have to serve your sentence after you're convicted, it would be the first time ever that somebody has ever been sentenced to prison for anything like this. There's an article in the New York Times today by one of my former research assistants, Norm Eisen, who says, well, he's found 50 cases where people go to jail for this. No, I've looked at some of the cases. They're extraordinarily serious cases where they're not just bookkeeping errors or submitting something as a legal expense when it was a legal expense, which it was in this case. So no, there's no precedent for jail. So option one, suspended sentence. Option two, delayed sentence. Option three, probation. I put you on probation for 5 years. So if he gets elected, he'd be the first president ever to be on probation. He'd have to report periodically to his probation officer. That's certainly a possibility. He could do that. Another possibility is he could impose a house arrest. He could say, look, I'm not going to stop you from campaigning. You can campaign from your home. You can do it from television. You can set up a studio in your home, but you're under house arrest. You're stuck in the Trump Towers now for a year or 2 years or whatever. I don't think he's going to do that, but house arrest is a possibility. Unlikely that will happen, but certainly possible. The other is a conditional sentence to say, look, all right, I'm not going to sentence you to prison on condition that you do A, B, C, D, and depending on what the conditions are, that would either be upheld or reversed. We have to remember this is very much a case of first impression. We just don't know what whether other courts have ever done anything like this before. Certainly no court has ever sentenced a man who's running for president. Yeah, they did back in 1920 when the socialist candidate for president was sentenced to prison for opposing the war and under the Espionage Act. He did. He went to prison and he campaigned from prison, and he got, I think, 3 million votes or something like that. He didn't affect the outcome of the election. That's an election in which an obscure guy ran for vice president on the Democratic ticket, a young man named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He lost, but then 12 years hence, he became the nominee for president, won, and served for the first time in history 3 and some odd months term. So that's a possibility. But I think the most likely possibilities, and the fourth, of course, is a very substantial fine, which he'll do. He'll impose a very harsh fine, and he'll also impose fines for contempt of court for violating the gag order. All of those will be appealed. And now the question of timing comes up, which is the crucial question, because what you don't want to have happen, and under the current schedule, what could easily happen is this. He gets sentenced to some probation or some suspended sentence, something where he doesn't have to go to prison, but where he's convicted, and where where the sentence is somehow not a prison sentence. He does that, campaigns, and he loses. Hypothetically, I'm not saying that's what I want or you want or anybody wants. Obviously, my viewers have different views on that, and I have different views depending on the day of the week. In any event, let's assume that happens. He loses, he gets a sentence, and he loses the election. And then between November 5th and January, whenever, the day of the inauguration, January 20th, a court reverses the conviction and says what I think it should say. A, the conviction is totally, completely invalid. The indictment never should have been brought. And we rebuke the prosecutor for bringing this indictment, and we rebuke the judge for not dismissing it. I think there's a possibility that the Supreme Court would say that. I think it's a possibility the New York Court of Appeals would say that. It said that essentially in the Harvey Weinstein case. It rebuked the judge. Let's assume hypothetically that would have happened. So between November 5th and January 20th, the conviction is reversed. Would anybody blame Donald Trump at that point? Let's assume it's also a very close election and he loses a close election. Would anybody blame Donald Trump at that point for saying this was not a fair election? I lost this election because I was improperly convicted. The courts have said I was improperly convicted, and therefore I'm not accepting the results of this election. I'm not advocating that. I think that would be wrong. I think whoever loses should accept the results of the election, but that certainly wouldn't be something that would be unusual or unlikely. As you know, Andrew Jackson didn't accept the results of his election, really. And there have been others who complained, Tilden Hayes, about the results of their elections. Now, that's the one thing I just don't want to see happen. I want to see this next election be determinative, to have no one have an opportunity to challenge it in any way. As you know, I believe there should be an election commission that determines the outcomes of elections. But unlike England, Israel, many other countries which have election commissions, we don't have one in the United States, so it goes to the courts. And so there'd be litigation up and down the line, undo the election, have a re-election now that we know that the conviction was invalid. I don't think any of that would happen, but there is a real prospect that we could have a situation where Trump loses and then the conviction is reversed, and we'll see what happens with the other convictions too, because by that time there might be trials in the Florida case, that's the classified material case, in the 2 cases involving January 6th, et cetera, the Washington, D.C. case and the Forney Willis case in Fulton County. We could see convictions or acquittals in any of those cases. D.C., it's going to be a conviction. There's no doubt about that. D.C. is like New York on steroids. An even higher percentage of voters in D.C. and likely jurors will have been people who hate Donald Trump and don't want to see him elected, and they'll convict him of anything. Fulton County, similarly, Florida, not so much. But there are now efforts to try to get rid of the Florida judge. The Democrats are now making some of the same arguments that they objected to and Republicans made about the judge. There's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy on all sides. And hypocrisy is the name of the game now. E pluribus unum should be replaced by whatever the Latin word is for hypocrisy. So those are my assessments of what's going to happen in sentencing and what's going to happen on the appeal. Why don't I think he has a chance of winning in the appellate division in New York? The appellate division are elected judges, and they're from Manhattan. And they're the jurors. They're just older and better educated, but they're the jurors. And they all know what happened to me and others who did anything that's perceived as in any way supportive of Donald Trump. All my friends on Martha's Vineyard stopped talking to me. One of my oldest friends, former student, who every year had a big concert that he would invite everybody to, and I got invited every year. But the year after I defended Trump, I didn't get invited, and I called him, and he said, he so much wanted to invite me because he admires me and he likes me. But it would be social suicide for him to invite me and to be seen as somebody who helped support the person who helped support the person who helped support Donald Trump. And, my family, my children, my wife have all been subject to incredibly unfair ostracism. I don't care myself, but it's unfair to the family. I value my real friends, not my fake Martha's Vineyard friends who only wanted to be friendly with me when they agreed with what I did and said, when others were friendly with me. But as soon as I became controversial because of my defense of Donald Trump on the floor of the Senate, they would have nothing to do with me. I'm not telling the story to receive pity from me. I've dealt with this. It's over. I'm just telling the story to make it clear what the judges will think. If you have judges, and I know judges from the appellate division, I've argued numerous cases in front of them. They're decent people, but they don't want to be pointed out in the street. Oh my God, look at that guy. That's the judge that freed Donald Trump and helped him become president. Oh my God, how does he sleep at night? We're never going to talk to him. And I just don't think judges are going to be able to resist the pressures. Same thing happened in the Harvey Weinstein case. The appellate division unanimously voted against him, even though I heard the argument, and the argument seemed to suggest that many of the judges believed his views were very strong. But in the end, they just didn't have the courage to reverse Harvey Weinstein's conviction. It took the New York Court of Appeals, in a 4-3 decision, to be sure, to reverse the conviction. And I think the same thing probably would be true in this case as well, in the Trump case. I don't think the appellate division elected judges from Manhattan would have the courage to reverse the conviction, even though it cries out for reversal. I've never seen a case with so many fundamental reversible errors. So I don't think that necessarily is going to happen. The New York Court of Appeals is a little different. They're not in Manhattan. They're in Albany. And several of the judges are not New York City judges. They're judges from upstate and other parts of the state. And they may have the willingness to do the right thing, because the right thing is clear. There's any first-year student should be able to win this case on appeal. But that doesn't mean they're going to be able to win this case. Any first-year student should have been able to win the Mike Tyson case in Indiana. But as soon as we knew it was going to be done in Indiana, we knew it was a lost cause. So don't think that appellate judges are above pressure. And again, I want to emphasize my fundamental disagreement with President Biden on this issue. President Biden got on television and said, look, we have to support the judiciary. We have to trust the judiciary, how important the judicial branch of government is. Total nonsense. Do not support any branch of the government unless they earn your support. Just because people wear robes doesn't mean you have to support them or you have to justify them. You know, the bar rules say, oh, lawyers should, support the judicial system. No, I don't believe that. I'm 85 years old. I'm not taking my cue from anybody as to who I should support and who I should justify. If you've earned my support, you get it. If you don't, you don't get it. I do not support the verdict in this case. I do not support the judge's decisions in this case. I do not support what the jury did in this case. I certainly do not support what Alvin Bragg did in this case. And I'm going to continue to condemn it and attack it as long as I am able to, because it's wrong. If I were living in the South in the 1920s and 30s, I hope I would have the courage to be Atticus Fitch. Actually, Atticus Fitch had an easy job. His client was innocent. But it's much harder when your clients are guilty, as some of my clients have been, obviously. But Atticus Fitch was willing to stand up to the racism of the South. And if I were living in the South in the 1920s and a jury verdict could come back against a black defendant who was accused of raping or assaulting a white woman, and I thought the evidence didn't support it, I would object to it and I would condemn the judiciary. Or if it acquitted a white defendant who was guilty of assaulting a black civil rights worker, I would have had the courage. I know I would have had the courage to stand up to the judiciary. And I'm not intimidated by judges or by robes. I've had too many of them as students, too many of them as friends. Some of my best friends are judges. And some of the people I admire the most in the world are judges. The people I clerk for, Judge David Bazelon and Justice Arthur Goldberg, enormous respect for them, but they would have had the courage to stand up as well against the judiciary. So it's very important that Americans don't take their cue from President Biden on this issue. On this issue, he's just wrong. Only respect the judiciary when it earns your respect, when it deserves your respect. Do not respect judges because they wear fancy robes. And so we'll wait and see. I hope the Trump lawyers try to expedite this sentencing and try to expedite this appeal, because I think it's important for America that there be a final decision on this case before Election Day. You know, prosecutors rush these cases to trial because they wanted a down and dirty jury verdict before the Election Day in order to influence the election. But they can't have it both ways. They can't say we wanted to rush to get a trial court judgment before the election, but we're not going to rush to get an appellate court possible reversal before the election. No. If you're rushing to get a trial verdict, you have to agree to the rush to get a potential appellate reversal. And so I hope that the prosecutors won't try to slow this process down in order to delay what I would regard as an inevitable reversal. Inevitable in the sense of moral and legal and factual. I don't mean it's necessarily going to happen. Nothing happens the way it usually does when the name of the defendant is Donald Trump. Let's be clear about that. Trump derangement syndrome, a phrase I invented in the context of Israel. I called it Israel derangement syndrome back in the 1990s. But Trump derangement syndrome is real. It applies at every level of our society. Just read what people have said about the verdict in this case. Sensible, rational people have become deranged when it comes to the verdict in this case. They cannot see that there's any problem. They think this is the most supportive and correct verdict, since who knows what. But it isn't. And it's very important that those of us who maintain an independence, and I hope that many of you out there maintain an independence, by the way, not only because you support Trump if you do, but you would have the same independence if the shoe were on the other foot. And it may be on the other foot in the next few days, because, we're seeing the trial of Hunter Biden. I don't know the facts well enough to know whether a conviction in the case is the kind of foregone conclusion that it looks like based on the facts. But I just want to make sure that Hunter Biden gets a fair trial as well. I'm not rooting for conviction any more than I was rooting for any result in any cases. Yes, I was rooting for an acquittal in the Donald Trump case in New York, obviously, because it never should have been brought. An acquittal would have been the right result. But I'm not doing it because his name is Donald Trump, or because he's running for president, or because I'm planning to vote for him, because I have no idea who I'm going to vote for. And so we need to get back to a time when people are rooting for justice, when people aren't cheering the result on partisan grounds. We're a long way away from that, and I'm worried that we're not getting any closer. So let's look at some of the letters that we got following the conviction. Okay. This one is not directly related to it, but it's relevant. Senator Manchin just denounced Democratic Party membership and went independent. Oh, yeah, that's true. And now here's the question. What are you waiting for, sir? I do admire your judicial independence. Very few people can negotiate the balance between law and politics. You are one, and I hope that you are not the only one. By the way, brilliant analysis this evening. Thank you. I appreciate that. Got a lot of support for my analysis following the conviction, and in the 2 days that we had special programs based on the verdict in the case. Look, I don't regard myself any longer as a kind of member or anything of or presumptive voter for the Democratic Party. My values are more akin to the platform of the Democratic Party than they are to the platform of the Republican Party. And so I generally vote for Democrats, but that doesn't mean that's the way I'm going to vote in this election. I just don't know. I haven't made up my mind. I know the two major candidates. I've known them for years. And I know Bobby Kennedy. I've known him for years. I knew his father. I knew his uncle. I know his aunt. I don't like her, but I know her, Caroline Kennedy. She's the one who, when she was seated next to me on Martha's Vineyard at an event, she said, if I knew you were coming, I never would have shown up because you defended Donald Trump. And I said, but I also defended a guy named Ted Kennedy. Remember that? Quiet response. In any event, I don't know who I'm going to vote for. So I'm getting a lot of pressure from both sides, including from my wonderful, wonderful wife. And so I will make a decision when I'm closer to the election. It will depend on a great many issues, including what's going on in the Middle East, including what's going on with immigration, including what's going on in a range of issues, the Supreme Court, etc. Okay. So many people think this verdict was legit. You know, my slogan, if it's not legit, you must acquit. It was not legit. Many people think this verdict was legit, and they will not be convinced otherwise. It's infuriating. You're absolutely right. It's shocking to me how many people are uncritical. I can imagine somebody saying, look, on balance, it's a close case. I understand the instruction was wrong and the evidentiary rulings, but, you know, people aren't saying that. People are saying this vindicates the system. This shows that, you know, nobody's above the law and it was the right result and the only result. People are saying that. People are saying the opposite, but the people who are saying the opposite happen to be right in this case. This was an abominable case to bring, an abominable verdict. And even some of the CNN commentators are now reluctantly admitting it. I wonder how many of them will keep their jobs. But no, you can't support this verdict and be a reasonable person. I know some of my friends support this verdict. Some of my friends support it only because they love the outcome. I've had some email exchanges with people. I don't understand how you can believe that this verdict is just and is in the interests of neutral, objective justice. I just don't understand it. This is an interesting one. I think the country should boycott New York for their leaders trying to impose their will on the country as a whole. I do not want that state to tell me who I have to vote for. I think truck drivers should reject taking loads of food to New York. No food, no gasoline, no nothing. No. I don't agree with that. New Yorkers are like everybody else. There's some good people, some not so good people. Oh my God, I said that. Trump said that about the people who wanted to take down the Confederate monuments. There are good people on both sides. There are good people on both sides in New York as well, including a lot of my relatives. So no, I don't want to boycott New York, but I do want to continue to complain about the verdict in New York. And I think people should feel free and should indeed, I want to encourage them to be critical of the verdict in this case and in any other case where the verdict is unjustifiable. Okay. I could never understand how politicians like Franco, Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, Lenin took over countries and put their people in chains. Now I see it could happen. If people don't fight, God help our country. Look, I don't like the word fight. I don't want to see anybody go to the streets or be violent. I want to see people write letters. I want to see people take these considerations into account in how they vote. I want us to be very critical of our government, and we should be critical regardless of which side of the political spectrum we're on. I think we should be critical of our side as well, because neither side is perfect here. We're seeing both sides in some ways trying to weaponize the criminal justice system. So a critical assessment of our system of checks and balances in our government is very much in order. Okay. There is no upside, one person says, in rushing into appeal. This needs to be handled very deliberately. Further, in most jurisdictions, there are rules that some errors cannot be argued on appeal if they were not made the subject of a motion for a new trial. I agree with all of that. But the point is, he has a very large legal team. And I could do a motion for a new trial in 2 days. The pre-sentence report can be done in 2 or 3 days. And there's no reason why the sentencing has to be put off so that a reversal will occur only after the election. So I'm sticking with my guns. Expedite the sentencing, expedite the appeal. Let's get this thing resolved one way or another. And by the way, I'm not telling you I'm going to be satisfied with an appellate affirmance. If there's an appellate affirmance of this case, I'll read the opinion very carefully, but I can't imagine an appellate affirmance of this case that would be based on the law. This case should never have been brought. There is no crime. We still to this day don't know whether or not the jury concluded that he intended to file false tax returns, intended to file false campaign contribution, or just that he filed the allegedly mistaken bookkeeping entry just to cover up the mistaken bookkeeper entry. We still don't know. And it's now days since the trial. That kind of a case cannot, and should not be affirmed on appeal. So, okay, last question. Professor, the Biden administration proposed what it's called three-phase plan for lasting peace in the Middle East. However, while it contained many proposals for the safety and well-being of Gaza, it contained nothing for the safety and welfare of Israel. Look, I don't think that's a particularly positive plan for Israel. I think it's a victory for Hamas. I think Hamas will try to gather its resources and its troops, build more tunnels, more rockets, and try to do it again. On the other hand, the administration is putting enormous pressure on Netanyahu to accept the deal, and probably some compromises will be effectuated. We'll wait and see. So far, Israel has accepted, or the outlines, at least the parameters of the deal. The United States has, Egypt has, Qatar has, and Hamas hasn't. So stop putting the blame on Israel. Let's put the pressure now on Qatar and on Hamas to accept the deal, and then we can evaluate whether on balance the deal was a good one or a bad one. I'll see you guys tomorrow.